Hello, world. It's me, your old pal, Dan Shaheen. Today, I've got a long-awaited guest, man. I've been tracking this guy down for months. We had it once scheduled. We had some mishaps. I couldn't connect. Not my fault, or not his fault, rather. He's a busy guy, so even taking any bit of time to come to this show to talk about comics is amazing, and I super appreciate our guest today, Bryan Hitch. We're going to bring him in just a minute. First, a little bit of show business. Thanks for watching today. If you haven't already, consider clicking subscribe down there. Watch this interview. If you like it, there's a thumb sticking up. Try clicking that one. If you don't like my interview, click the thumb sticking down, but maybe leave a comment. Give me some constructive criticism. Let me know what I'm doing wrong or right. And if you want to see some of your comics here on this show, where do you send them? You send them to the $1 Million mailbox, P.O. Box 1163, Arcata, California, 95518. Beautiful Arcata, California, by the way. Send your comics in. I'll bring them in with Larry Young from AIT Planet Lair. We'll spread them out on the $1 Million Comics Camp, and we'll take a look at them. Okay, next week, a week from today, we've got another exciting guest. We've got Mark Evanier. If you don't know who Mark Evanier is, go check out newsfromme.com. and just see the 1,000,001 things related to comics and cartoons and everything. He's been at every single San Diego Comic-Con running some of the coolest panels ever. Gonna want to come in and check him out and talk to him. Okay. We've got comments. We've got a few people watching already. Oh, Coffee Breath, longtime watcher, says, yes, Justin Rogers, so excited, as am I. Guys, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end, so hold your questions. You can super chat throughout or chat throughout. If I see interesting stuff there, I might pop it up during the interview, but I'll probably wait till the end. So without further ado, we're going to talk to our guest, but first, let's take it to a more appropriate venue, shall we? All right, and without further ado, let's bring in our guest. I think he's the best penciler in modern mainstream superhero comics. I think he's been super influential to not just comics, but to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and just way beyond. This guy is a fantastic designer, a great artist, and storyteller. Let's welcome to the show for the first time, Bryan Hitch. Hi, Bryan.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So it was a little hard tracking you down. You're in London, right?
Right, just outside, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, you're in London, so we got a time difference. It's the evening where you're at. I know you've got you just finished dinner. It's family time and whatnot. So we're gonna time for a glass of wine. So we'll come in here and let's talk about your career, man. I started looking into this, and I first read you in The Authority, I think. But looking back, man, you went all the way back to what? Well, tell me about Action Force.
Well, Action Force, yeah, that was 86. I would say by the time we got to Authority, it had taken me 12 years to become an overnight success. So, yeah, there'd been a lot of work before that. I was 16, and Marvel had a UK branch. I was up in the far north west of England, and I just left school. And I sent some samples to Richard Starkings, who was of Comic Craft fame. He was the editor. Him and Simon Furman were the editors at Marvel UK, and I sent them some samples, and they gave me pretty much a five. Well, it was a 10-page story, actually, five pages, parts 1 and 2, and they gave it pretty much on the spot. So
at 16.
Yeah, I was 17 when I finished it because I turned 17 over the course of doing the work. But yeah, that was quite an early start, really. I mean, it was terrible stuff, but somebody obviously liked it enough to give me another one straight away. So yeah, I was by 17, I was working full time drawing comic, which is great, which is what I wanted to do. I mean, it was terrible. It was terrible. But Richard and Simon seemed to like it well enough to keep giving me jobs. So.
Well, I haven't looked. I tried to find some pictures. I tried to find some examples of the Action Force. I couldn't find any pictures.
No, I don't think there's much of it.
Who was your? What were you reading? Like, who was your style informed by at that time? Like, what were you?
By that point, yeah. So, I mean, I was growing up. All we could get where I came from were DC comics. So my introduction to American comics was entirely based on DC. I didn't really know Marvel existed initially. Except beyond the TV shows like the Bill Bixby Hulk and and some terrible TV movies that they did in the 70s as well. So comics growing up, it was the people like Jim Aparo, Don Newton, especially Garcia Lopez, Jerry Ordway's All-Star Squadron stuff was I just adored, especially issues 19 and 20, which were his first issues as penciler. As well as inker. I just loved it. I copied those cover to cover actually at least once when I was 14 or something, 13. So those were the guys that really, had me. And then, again, about that time, what was it, shortly before I turned pro, John Byrne did his Man of Steel reboot. And, that was my first introduction to John Byrne's stuff as well. Though actually I realized later Marvel was also producing, Marvel UK was producing weekly comics, which are reprinting a lot of American material. First there was pocket books in the very early 80s. So there I saw some Kirby Fantastic Four, the first issue of which had the wedding of Reed and Sue in it. And then they did the Inhumans. They're just like the best ones, the Inhumans ones and the Wakanda ones. So those were all done in the first collection of pocketbooks, and a friend lent those to me, gave them. I remember in a geography lesson, he passed them over to me like a contraband. And that was my first introduction to Marvel stuff. But we didn't start getting Marvel comics till another local newsagent started stocking them in the middle 80s. And I came in sort of at the end of Walt Simonson's Thor and the end of Miller and Mazzucchelli's Born Again. And again, that expanded my entire kind of thinking and the horizons. So then it was a scramble to kind of go back and find older material through, writing to existing comic shops and trying to find back issues. And when I discovered Forbidden Planet in London was also at the same time as when Dark Knight came out, and I as well for the first time. So that and Watchmen were kind of expansive.
86. That would be about 86, right? And that's
right.
Year.
Just before, and again, I went pro the following year. Just so
amazing.
There was, I mean, I really wasn't putting any of this stuff together in any sort of coherent form, but that was what I was surrounded by.
Yes. That's a great stew to be bubbling in, right? Like that's just an amazing time.
There's one guy I probably never mention as much as I should mention, and actually that's Kurt Swann, because he was the first comic. His Superman stuff was the first stuff I read. It was reprinted in every Christmas. Companies like British companies would publish what they called annuals. They weren't the same kind of annuals you guys had in American comics, except in fact they were annual. But these were large size, large format, hardcover, and they reprinted American material often. So you could get anything from Tom and Jerry to the Disney characters, and of course DC and Marvel stuff. So my mum, I was 6-7 years old, had bought me a Superman annual which had Kurt Swann and Bob Oxner artwork in it, and that was kind of my first real introduction to superhero comics. And Superman became my favorite character and remained so really throughout. So I think Kurt Swann was the measure against which I always kind of felt like comics would judge, because it was my baseline DNA experience. And it's interesting because in later years, you look back at kind of that stuff and you see that, it's very naturalistic drawing, very naturalistic piece, not overly exaggerated. Cars look real, buildings look real, environments
True.
look real, folds in clothing look real. And I didn't realize that how much that had become kind of my baseline kind of DNA, if you like, on which everything else got built. And again, yeah, I still think of Bob Oxner as Kurt Swann's best inker for me. It's my favorite inker ever, Kurt Swann. I love the big beefy line that he puts on them. It's, and
There's
Oxner was
one
such
name
a
that's missing on to me that I assumed would have been one of the first people that you said was an influence, and that's Neil Adams. How were you?
Yeah, didn't come to him till much later. In fact,
Yeah.
I mean, I was aware of him because he was spoken of with great reverence.
Yes.
And again, in the middle 80s, they reprinted DC reprinted his Dead Man stuff. And that was the first experience I'd had of Neil's stuff. And when I moved down to London and started working with Paul Neri at Marvel UK in the very early 90s, Paul has a terrific collection of comics going right back to the 40s. He's a real collector of classic material. But he just lent me everything with Neil Adams, in it. And I fell in love immediately because it was, all the people from John Byrne, Alan Davis, Jim Aparo, Don Newton even, there was always traces of Neil Adams in all of their stuff. Dick Giordano's inking, which I adored.
Yes.
When Richard Starkers left Marvel UK to move to America in about 87, 88, I bought his Superman Muhammad Ali book off him, and that just because that was the first time I think it experienced big scale visuals in comics. Apart from the fact the pages were big, but like when he takes on the fleet and just pushes that airlock through the ship, I was like, that was one of those kind of benchmark experiences as well. So. Yeah,
Speaking of realism, your comments about realism and about Kurt Swann, that's what immediately, because I go, Neil, right? And that Alex Raymond school sort of came more from the newspaper strips. Yeah.
So there's always, I think, if you go back to it, there are two founding fathers of comic book stars. There's Milt Caniff and there's Alex Raymond. And people seem to follow one school or the other, there are people who are like Carmen Infantino and a few others who clearly loved Alex Raymond, but Milt Caniff provided a greater kind of energetic impetus to their work than the Alex Raymond stuff, which is, but you can see that in Kurt Swann and Al Williamson and Neil Adams again and Wally Wood and all those guys. There's a lineage. There's always a lineage, and there are crossovers, but generally seems to be those two founding schools of kind of what comics is built on.
Because when I looked at your work originally, and maybe it was because the first stuff I think I saw by you had those Paul Neri inks, which, it gives me the reminder of Alan Davis, who he worked with, right, for so long. And I always looked at your stuff and thought, Alan Davis kind of influence.
Oh, sure,
especially
absolutely.
UK artist. Yeah, and then the Paul Neri and his inks, I can see where him pulling from Neil Adams and everything else might have also helped form your style.
I came to Alan's stuff. I mean, I was aware of Alan's stuff at Marvel UK in the 80s, the Captain Britain stuff, which I saw sporadically. But my first real experience of Alan was when he started working on Batman and the Outsiders for DC. And I really liked it. I was still, at that point, I was still very much a Jim Aparo fan, and I preferred the original Aparo, but I liked the energy in Alan's work, and I didn't really know he was British particularly. But when I started working professionally, we met very early on. There was a group of people with Mark Farmer, Mike Collins, Paul, and a very small group of people that kind of went to signings or comic marts. There was like monthly comic marts in London where they just basically dealers would come with back issues. It was like the dealer's room of a con without there being a con. So we just go and we meet at those things and buy comics and go for a Chinese afterwards. And that was all kind of nice. But Alan saw something in what I was doing, mostly I think in terms of storytelling, because I think if I have any natural talent, it's as a storyteller. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But he sort of started to provide a great deal of help and guidance, and he sent me lots of copies of his pencils, which I'd never really seen people's pencils before. And I became, what was I, 17, 18 then? And I became really heavily influenced by his stuff, because just seeing it in that raw form.
By Davis's pencils.
Yeah, that was perfect.
Okay, yeah.
Even tighter back then than they are now. They were just literally, you could print from them. At least that's what it looked like. They were just so beautifully realized. And that was also at the time he was working on the early Excalibur issues. And that was under that kind of still that Jim Shooter Marvel, where there were many panels on a page and it was lots of tiny figures, and Alan could draw them with cartoony realism and energy and expressiveness that was just unlike anything else going on at the time. And I know Jim Lee came in very soon after and essentially changed the face of comics for a generation after that. But I think I think Alan's stuff at that period is I think overlooked for how beautiful it actually is.
Oh, it's head and shoulders to me above almost everything else coming out during that time.
Yeah, I agree.
And his speed, right? Maybe it was working with the inker, but I don't remember a lot of Excalibur issues being late. I remember a few filling issues.
If they were late, it's because Chris was late, not because Alan was. I mean, Alan and Alan both told me this early on, is that when Alan was trying to get into the industry, because bear in mind that Paul worked as an editor at Marvel UK several times over, one of which Alan was when Alan was doing Captain Britain, initially. So before Paul became Alan's inker, he was Alan's editor, and Alan, he said Alan would, say, how long should I spend on a page? I could do a beautiful page in 2 days or 3 days. And Paul said, just do 1 page a day. That's it. And Alan stuck to that, religiously. That's what he'd do. And to be that good and that reliable. I mean, honestly, I think apart from Stuart Immonen, I can't think of many other people who can produce work of that, that quality of that time. With that level of detail.
John Byrne, like for quantity, and I don't know if it's at the same level of rendering, and maybe
no, it's not. And there's there's a lot less on a page with a Byrne page than was with Alan or Stuart Immonen and so on. And Byrne has his process and it works really well for him, and that's great. And Byrne's stuff in his Fantastic Four and his Superman stuff, I just still hold up. I still just
his Superman, right? Like, okay,
yeah.
Kurt Swann, Superman, right? That's where you came up from. What did you think about? I don't mean to pivot here rapidly, but
right.
Man of Steel came out. John Byrne is like, no, this is how you do it, and I think he nailed it. Frankly, I think it's the only of a character like that that's ever stuck and worked.
Yeah, I agree. It was profoundly good. It was a shame that it wasn't as well supported by DC as it ought to have been, I think. Because I think it went off the rails pretty quickly, and I don't know quite whether that was who was at the end of that particular process. But certainly, as a kid, it was the first time I'd ever seen an event like that, where something like that could happen. I mean, that Crisis on Infinite Earths and that. I mean, I loved the Titans stuff growing up. So when they did Crisis, it was just which is why I still love drawing big event stories, because Crisis and Superman and that kind of big idea thinking and big event kind of comics is still, that's at the root of everything I love doing.
Well, you've done it, Bryan. You've done some of the most.
I haven't done a Crisis yet.
You haven't, but man, we'll talk. We got to get into Ultimates soon. We're going to look at it too. I just want to. We want to get you past here. You got in UK comics quickly, early. I mean, that's like Jim Shooter early, 16 years old, right? That's like early.
But I genuinely spent 10 years not having a clue what I was doing, and I don't think that helped me a lot, because as I said, the Alan Davis influence became somewhat overwhelming to the point where I was swiping from him, and that really, it wasn't doing anybody any well. It was well acknowledged. I mean, it happens, but most of the time it happens when you're kind of learning how to do something, not when you're actually doing something, and I'll admit,
when I saw it, I go, Alan Davis, this guy likes Alan Davis.
Oh yeah,
Like when I,
absolutely. I did. I wanted to draw just like Alan Davis at that point.
yeah.
But
you
Swipe.
went on. So what did you, when did you say, look, I could be successful aping this guy, but I need to go somewhere else? And where did you go? What?
It was a couple of accidents. I was genuinely thinking about moving on from comics. I didn't feel like I was getting anywhere. There were a couple of times things had come up, a project at Marvel, a project at DC. I'd really pushed to try and get at this. This was when would this have been? 97 maybe. This would have been about 97. So I'd been in the industry then about 11 years, 10 and a half, 11 years. And I thought I was going to move on, and I'd been in touch with the people who storyboarded the Batman animated series. Brett Blevins had helped and said, look, if you want to come and do this stuff, you come and do this stuff. More than happy. So my plan was to do a couple of comics really quickly, get a bit of money in the bank, and I was going to go to America and try and break into media, film, TV, and work in production departments. I thought designing films, working as a designer. Back then it was pre-computer, it was all pen and paper, storyboards, that kind of thing. And I had a friend who was also an animator, and he did storyboards for Disney and other stuff. And we just thought, maybe that's the way to go, because I'm not really making any progress here. I'm being overlooked. And another project came up at DC, and I was told I wasn't a big enough name to do it. And the person who did do it, I thought, was at least on the same level that I was. So, you think, maybe something.
You want to
else.
name that project?
No, I don't. No, I don't, because it's not fair on the other guys.
Well, I mean, you're complimenting. You're saying he's at your level. I don't think it's an insult to say that.
No, it's fine. I just, there are times I can name names. I just don't think that's kind of. But anyway, so one of the projects that came up was Stormwatch, which Warren had relaunched. Oscar Jimenez was drawing it, and 3 issues in, or an issue and a half in, or whatever. But the thing is, what was interesting was they came to me and said, look, can you take on the book? And I was like, yeah, okay. And this was the first time I'd ever just not cared about trying to be anything but on time. And the book was horrifically late, so nobody could draw a full issue of it, really, except one issue, which was the one that introduced Apollo and Midnighter, as it turned out, which, and I found I got on really well with Warren. We just seemed to think the same way in terms of how comics could look. And I think a lot of things that had kind of come and gone in the past, projects I had or hadn't done, or I'd thought about doing or tried to do, my ideas about what I thought my comics should look like and how storytelling should be were just starting to come together. And what it really needed, I suppose, was the right kind of outlet and somebody who thought the same way. Because, these are a lot of coincidences. And I think some success is often built on a great deal, a confluence of coincidences. Yes. But in this case, Warren was the unusual writer in that he was a very visual thinker. But he'd also do things, if he asked for something particularly taxing, he'd give you some very easy pages to draw, because he understood that also a deadline is a deadline, And Stormwatch was horrifically behind. So I drew the first issue, which is the Apollo Midnighter introduction issue. Everybody seemed to like it. I did it particularly quickly. And it turned out that apparently, as I was told, that the choice for who was going to be offered the book on the initial relaunch was either me or Oscar Jimenez. They picked Oscar, and it all went horribly wrong. I don't know why. Just there was some issues with getting the work done. So then I got brought in, and all at that point I was trying to do was just earn some money so I could piss off and go into an entirely different industry. But it's something, despite the fact that I think I only managed to do one full issue because, as I say, the book was just horrifically late, and we had to produce several issues over about 2 months just to get the book out the door.
Back on track.
Yeah, and so the book got done. Warren and I like working with each other. We clearly thought the same way in some regards. And he seemed to like the way I told stories. you know.
There was
So
something very special about that book too. There was something iconic about, like, every issue seemed to have like an iconic, like some kind of reverberance to some other bigger pop culture thing. Sort of what he would go on to do more in humanitarian, but it sort of seemed like the germs of it were all.
I think you're right. I think that Warren is playing with ideas then that became the Authority and especially Planetary. But so when he knew he was going to end Stormwatch, his replacement project was Planetary. Wildstorm still wanted to work with me. Jim was quite happy. Initially they were going to try and put me on one of the Alan Moore books. They talked about Promethea, which I think ultimately went to the right artist. Actually,
I am going to agree with that, bro. It's funny. I was going to bring up J.H. Williams to you for sure as one of your contemporaries.
Well, he was definitely the right artist for what Alan was doing on that book, and I think
that's an amazing. That's an amazing book.
Well, what's interesting was when they sent me that stuff, at least in outline form. Reading it, it was the opposite of working with Warren. It just felt like there's a complete disconnect. I felt like I just wasn't on the same wavelength as Alan. And they at one point they'd asked me to do a few pages of an issue of Wildcats that Alan had written that Travis was drawing and run late on. And I read the script, and there was all these multiple panels with a ridiculous, like one full page of type. Single spaced for a single panel, which was panel 1 of 6 on a page. And I was reading this stuff. I was like, I don't even know how to approach this. And I just said that. I was honest with him. I said, I think I'll lock up if I try and draw this. I have no idea actually how to approach it. I just think I'm the wrong person for it. Anyway,
for anyone who doesn't know, Alan Moore's scripts are like, it's like a letter to the art.
I
right?
know they're a thing. They're a novel unto themselves, you know. But as you when the book came out, Travis had turned out to drawn all the pages anyway. But that page that was all these 6-panel page with all this stuff, Travis had just drawn it as a single full page splash with a figure flying in the air and no background. It's like, well, I could have done that, you know. Why didn't I think of that? Jeez.
And which ultimately Alan Moore is kind of okay with, from what I've heard, is like that's sort of his deal, is like, give it to the artist. I did my thing. Now you do your thing.
Which, you know, maybe if I'd felt, but I think as a storyteller, where I come from is in reading the script, and then I kind of try and deconstruct what the writer's asking for, not just what's written on the page, and then you have to kind of reimagine it as though it's a shooting script for a movie. You still have to direct the movie, move the actors around, find the emotional core, the beats, the narrative, deliver that with the right image, you know, and so on and so on. And I was just at that point where that stuff was really beginning to make sense for me, where I wasn't trying to do it like somebody else, where I had to feel like it was my choices, not me trying to emulate others' choices, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, totally. Which is amazing. That book in particular, I can't imagine Promethea drawn by Bryan Hitch.
No, it really wouldn't have worked.
But it fits so perfectly. What you're describing fits so perfectly with what I know, having read a few Warren Ellis scripts and a few Mark Millar scripts as well. They are very much full traditional script. Like, they're breaking it down into panels on a page with beats and things. Is that true?
It is true. But actually, certainly when we got into Authority, there were certainly pages where Warren just would write the dialogue and that would be it, because that's all I'd need, because he knew how I'd break it down, given that dialogue. So by about issue 3 or 4 in, he'd describe just what he needed to describe to set a scene, and then pretty much then it would be like the next panel dialogue, the next panel the dialogue. And unless there was a specific action that might be required within the scene, he gave me very little, because that was kind of the shorthand we developed very quickly.
Sure. And he trusted you at that point.
I think ultimately, right? Yeah. But before the Authority actually happened was, Wildstorm got back in touch and said, well, we'll put you with Scott Dumbia, not Scott Dumbia, with Scott Lobdell on something. And I'd done a few issues of X-Men, fill-in issues and whatnot with Scott years before, because I'd floated around the X-Men office for about 4 years doing fill-ins and half series and whatnot, specials here and there. So I called Warren. I said, I'm going to be working with Scott Lobdell on something. I don't know what yet. We had a chat for a bit, and then went away, made some coffee, came back, my phone rang again, and Warren said, I can't let you do that. You cannot work with Scott. I cannot let you work with Scott Lobdell. It's just, I'll write you something. Just give me half an hour. So it went away again, and then my fax went, and this single page thing came out. It had the authority on the top. It said, we're going to take Jenny Sparks, Jack Hawksmoor, and Swift, and we're going to add a few new characters, a new Doctor, and the Engineer, and we'll use Mr. Majestic as Superman, and we'll just do basically our version of Justice League, and that was it. I said, okay, if they go for it, I am in, and then I can't remember whether it was him or me that had the idea, but oh, that was it. It was Joe Casey was doing a Mr. Majestic series, so he was off the table. So Warren said, unusually in Stormwatch, I didn't kill them off, but we've got those Apollo and Midnighter characters. Why don't we just use them? They're Batman and Superman anyway. Let's use them. It's like, great. I love those guys. So, and then they needed a base, and I suggested this 50-mile-long spaceship powered by a caged baby universe, which became the thing. And then Warren came back with 3 story arcs, and simple stuff, simple like big ideas, because that's all it was going to be about. It was just going to be the big idea, the Michael Bay movie version of a big idea. That was in four chapters per story. That was the setup. And then on the second one, Warren's outlining that, and he's talking about then they'll, the alternative Earth will attack the carrier. So why do they do it on horseback, with cavalry? And he's like, that's brilliant. I thought, fuck, I've never drawn a horse before in my life. What was I thinking? Let alone loads of them, let alone a fight scene with horses, Yeah. And I was saying, what about this? We can have this dogfight over Los Angeles with the shifts and all these other. And Warren's great. So he wrote this page like the Fleets Engage, which then, took me 4 days to draw. It took him 30 seconds to write. But you know what? I had more fun on that book than I think I had at any other point until I drew Hawkman. It was just wild all the time. And
wow,
the biggest change for me was thinking this stuff was going to happen. I thought, you know what? I've been late and unreliable here. All the time, and that's possibly why I missed out on some of the assignments I missed out. So I thought, you know what, I am going to do every one of these 12 issues, and I am going to do it on time, no matter what. So I was at minimum of 5 pages a week. I did 7 pages a week actually on average.
You're talking about Hawkman now?
No, the Authority. Authority,
yeah,
which is apart from Sean Phillips, I'm the only other guy to have penciled 12 consecutive issues of a Wildstorm project that shipped on time, without any changes of creative team. So we was the same writer, penciler, inker, colorist, every single issue, and we're relentlessly. In fact, Rochelle Brissenden, who's now Travis Chare's wife, actually, but at the time she was the editor on Authority. I don't think she looked at a schedule until issue 7 because the book just arrived every month. From through FedEx from Paul, just inked every 3 weeks. I'd pencil an issue, and when Paul's finished, he'd send it off, and it would just arrive complete on her desk. And so she never really had to look till issue 7 to see what kind of. And then by then, I think we're still 3 months ahead. And we didn't start with a lot of lead time. We just never missed anything. We never missed a day. And actually, I drew some others. I remember Scott Dumbia came over to London, and he'd heard that I was going to do an issue of Martian Manhunter that Peter Tomasi asked me to do, and I was saying, well, yeah, that's right. And he said, and he sat me down. We were in a pub together. And he said, you really shouldn't. You've been great on keeping on schedule, Authority. You really shouldn't think about taking anything else on. So I'd really advise against doing the Martian Manhunter issue, and I said I finished it this afternoon, and he's like, and he said, "Do you want to do issue of Wildcats?" So I said, "Yeah, all right, I'll do an issue of Wildcats as well." And that was where
I don't think I've read either one of those issues. I got to find those.
Okay, so it was the middle of Travis's run. It was an issue of Wildcats. I think I drew it in a week because it was so behind. It was just it was a real change for me that 12 months spent on that. I think I drew 15, 16 issues of stuff altogether in that 12 months. And it completely changed everything for me because Authority changed, my perception of how to do comics, and it changed others' perception of how I did comics, and it sort of became a brand because I think, the comics changes constantly, and it's, after something's become the norm, it's always looking for the next thing.
Yes.
Because it's pop culture, that's the nature of pop culture, and Jim and all those terrific Image guys had made such an enormous change in comics from the late 80s, and by then we're in the late.
Yes, they did.
And we're 10 years on then when Authority came out, and I think somebody was looking for kind of the next language or the next visual idea, and that was the start of it. And because we were able to follow it with the Ultimates when we did, it kind of cemented that idea as that widescreen cinematic, semi-realistic thing as a brand,
that's
visual
that's
brand.
where comics are now. That's
sure.
That's really, that style did really take over. I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because I didn't
20 years on now.
Yes, and I didn't read Authority though until it had already been published. I'd been in college, and Image, honestly, the Image founders and stuff kind of pushed me away from comics, and from Image Comics, I didn't really like the output that was coming out until I read The Authority, and I said, "This is something different. This is something new, and this is amazing."
I think it is, but I think it's unfair to say it wasn't built on the stuff that the Image guys had done, because actually what they'd done post Jim Shooter was bring back scale, bring back bigness, bring back that bold visual again, because comics were very compressed visually, not just the storytelling. It was very visually compressed. There were no double page spreads, or rarely there were double page spreads, and big images and big ideas spread across. And they were kind of like the Beatles in that way. What the Beatles were for music. They just made everybody sit up and enjoy it. It was just something bigger and different and cool.
Agreed. I've totally come full circle on that stuff, by the way. Like, as much as at the time I was not a huge Liefeld fan, although I was a McFarlane fan, I've come totally around to see like the generations of people they inspired and brought into comics that might not have been continued reading comics if it wasn't for the energy that the Image founders brought to the table. Right. They deserve a lot just for that.
Absolutely. And the thing is, when I was doing things like, especially Authority, my thinking became, because of how I like to tell stories, I still like the big crescendo, the big idea that represent by the Image stuff, but those guys were terrific at doing the amazing big figures punching through the panels and stuff. And then my thinking was, well, what if I keep it all within the panel, so it's like a screen, and actually not be afraid to be wide on the shot and have a tiny figure. I mean, it isn't as cool as having the big figure, but maybe the moment works differently and sells a different kind of story, so like when the engineer went to the moon, and we just kind of ad-libbed that one, and the engineer took a moment to just enjoy the wonder of being in there. But again, it's the little figure leaving the earth, and you get the scene of the earth, and that was something I think was genuinely cinematic in its thinking, at least anyway.
So were you avoiding things like panel punch outs and things like that, like characters emerging? Yeah, you were trying to keep it like a screen composition.
Absolutely. And actually, in Ultimates, I don't think we ever broke the panel borders once.
Yeah, which is interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that, thinking back to it. I remember it, and I would think the Hulk is bursting out all over the place, but he's not.
And And there was other things like I didn't want sound effects because, again, I thought that objectified
Yeah.
lettering in a way that felt off with that kind of attempt to create those images that will immerse you in kind of like the storytelling. And the other thing was that no speed lines as well. You know, again, those kind of things that are comic book shorthand for things.
Yes.
Because I began to realize if you positioned the figure, and again, this is something that surprised me that so few people seem to realize drawing comics, is that when you, Western comics anyway, when you read comics, you read top to bottom, left to right, top to bottom. That's how you read. You know, that's how you read a book. That's how you read magazines. So you know, a comic is the same way. You read left to right, top to bottom. So action has to flow left to right. Otherwise, you encounter effect before you encounter cause. So if you have somebody on the right hand side of the page punching somebody, so the punch is going right to left across the page, the first thing you see is the effect of the punch, not the punch.
Yes.
Reverse that, your eyes flow with the punch and you get a sense of motion, right?
Yeah.
So I reasoned that if you apply all those ideas and you apply a clever use of perspective, positioning within shot, so that, you know, you can create a sense of motion and energy that's entirely implied without actually having to do things like speed lines and motion blur and any of that stuff. And it seemed to work anyway. It's something I've done ever since, really.
Yeah. Well, I think we should look at this. We can't just talk about your art. We need to look at your art.
This is where you find the only panel I've done speed lines and bursting panel borders with, isn't it?
Okay, well, this is where we need to look at a little something we like to call here we call this the $1 Million Comics Cam. All right, so here we are, $1 Million Comics Cam, and we'll take a look here.
I've got the wrong glasses on for this, but I'll see if I can see it.
Oh, I think you can, because we've got pan and scan zoom mode in effect. So we're going to come in real close on all your work, Bryan. I wanted to real quick point out your book, Bryan Hitch's Ultimate Comic Studio.
You know, first of all, I don't have that studio anymore. Second of all, I don't draw that way anymore.
Okay. Out of date?
It might be useful, or it might be useful. My process is entirely different now.
I found a lot of really cool stuff. I'm not an artist, but
that was a nice studio.
This is a nice book. It's a very well produced, made book too. And some of the stuff that you talk about is stuff that we don't. I haven't seen in How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. Some of it I haven't. Stuff like this.
Well, it's because we were all thinking differently. You know, I mean, everything's built on everything else. You know, what you get How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, and then, you know, you get other people doing things differently, and then you build on that and you build on that. It's always a process of standing on the shoulders of other people and learning everything.
That was a great book, though. John Buscema was pretty awesome. Like,
I've watched the YouTube videos with him and Stan Lee. They're always entertaining.
I like this, but I'm going to recommend it to people to check out, even though it's not the way you draw anymore. If you want to draw the way Bryan Hitch used to draw, check this one out. Okay, guys. All right, so let's ditch this and let's take a look at. I'm just going to start going through this a little bit. If you want to talk about just how you went, we just talked about the Authority a little bit. Mark Millar ended up taking over on the Authority, right, for Warren Ellis. So you want to tell us a little bit about that and how it led to this?
Well, I didn't know Mark at the time. I mean, I'd read Mark's stuff on things like the Adventures of Superman stuff, which was, or, you know, the animated book that he was writing for DC, and it's based on the animated Superman show. And, you know, Warren really liked his writing and recommended him because we were only ever doing the 12 issues. So he recommended him for that, and Frank Quietly anyway, was taking on the art afterwards. So, you know, he knew it was going to be good, and it was. But I'd never talked to Mark. I'd never met Mark. I'd almost gone to CrossGen briefly in the early 2000s and didn't. I know. That's a story in itself. I'm not going to get into that.
I mean, wouldn't you have had to move like to their Branch Davidian compound in Florida or wherever it was?
I know. Yeah. Anyway, that's a story and a half, but I'm sure everybody that's been involved in it says it's a story and a half. But I had a Mark. Basically, what happened was Joe Quesada rang me up, and he said, "I don't know if you've heard, but the lunatics are running the asylum. Why don't you come and join the party?" And that was the exact quote. And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, we're doing this stuff, this kind of ultimate line. It's going to be for kids, young readers, and reintroduce all the Marvel characters from the beginning again, kind of like a line-wide core character, Spider-Man. We want to do the X-Men. We're going to do the Avengers. And let me put you in touch with Mark Miller." So Mark rang, and I think we remember it as we spent almost the entire day on the phone talking. It was like we're the same age, apart from a month or two apart. We grew up about 100 miles from each other. He was in Scotland, I was in the far north of England. And I'll tell you this little story in a minute. We have a bizarre little crossover story from childhood we didn't realize till years later.
Okay.
But we culturally were into exactly the same stuff, and he had built his idea of how to write modern comics entirely on what Warren and I had done on Authority. He said, he and Grant Morrison would pore over the Authority that month to see what why that was working and what was cool about it. And so when Mark took on Authority, he was very much building his visual sense on what Warren and I had done. And it sounded like we were going to get on, and we had all these ideas about Kang the Conqueror and Asgard and Guardians of the Galaxy, big stuff like that. And, as I keep telling the story, and then September the 11th happened, 9/11 happened. And we realized we couldn't do those stories anymore. It just didn't seem culturally right. And actually what felt cultural, because I remember Mark saying that the phrase that changed it was somebody in the news referring to an act of super terrorism. He said, that's it. That's the modern age thing, isn't it? It's not villainy anymore. People aren't robbing banks or conquering worlds. They're killing people by, and then you look at what happens and the horror of it and the buildings falling down. You think that that's the reality. That's what it was. And if superheroes really existed, this is kind of the stuff. This is what it would really look like. The devastation would be horrific, and it would be personal, and it would be real. And then that led to us thinking that these people had to be real too. They can't be paragons. They couldn't be, these. They're not Superman, they're not. They don't have those ideals, except possibly for Steve, for Captain America.
I mean, which is very much in fitting with the Stan and Jack, just the Marvel ethos originally,
exactly. Right? Absolutely, yeah. Because the big difference between and again that we've had this conversation. The big difference between Marvel and DC was that it was New York at Marvel, it was Metropolis at DC. DC was a fantasy world of gods and mythology, and Marvel actually was Spider-Man, was a real teen who went to college and had real problems. And, and once you start getting in that mindset and you're building it on things like the real world, I started thinking the only way I can do this is to make it feel absolutely real. But that again goes back to childhood, because, that's what Richard Donner did with Superman the movie. He took all the mythology of the Superman comics, and he made Superman actually exist in a real world and be believable, and he had, he said that, many times in documentaries since, he put this banner up in the office that said verisimilitude on it, which means the appearance of reality. And, that became as much my watchword with Ultimates as it was with Superman the movie. So again, one thing leads to another, and, this owes as much to Superman the movie as it owes to, anything else culturally going on at the time. But again, it's pop culture, and it exists in a time frame that's of its creation, and of its creation was October 2011. So it has to exist in a post 9/11 world.
Well, so I mean, it's easy to say that, Bryan, but it's not easy to draw this.
Oh, I love that stuff.
I obviously, I'll be looking at a page I bought from you of Batman's grave, by the way, that I bought because it had architectural elements in it, and I love your architectural. Or you want to real briefly just talk about, like, I don't know, what are your What do you do? Just look at pictures? Are you studying architects?
It's obviously when you're drawing stuff like that, you need an element of reference to it because it's difficult to make it up. So you certainly need photo ref. But actually, with all of this stuff, my interest in what engaged me and engrossed me in drawing wasn't the picture itself, but what part of the entire story it served. And so drawing a picture like that with a big restaurant scene, which is a number of different elements, because you're looking at people sitting at tables, you're looking at the background elements, you're looking at the building the environment, making that up as well. So combining all these elements to make something feel that real and giving it that immense sound. This is again inverting some of the stuff that had come before, where I think establishing shots are seen as like a tiny throwaway shot at the beginning of a page. Because my feeling was that actually the beat, the moment, can be an enormous close-up of a human face showing emotion, because that's the core of the moment.
I don't want to focus on the movies really, because I'll be honest, the Ultimates is better than any Avengers movie in my mind. Like the portrayal. No, it is. The portrayal of Captain America in that first issue, that's what made Ultimates a hit. If that first issue didn't come on as strong as it did, and you didn't have that vision of Captain America being what he was, which is an ass-kicking World War II era soldier, right? He's in the trenches, but walking the line between, is he just a, propaganda effort, or is he the real deal? And he's both. Amazing. I showed that book to people I grew up with, who I tried to get to read comics my entire life, who would never read a comic, and they devoured the Ultimates, and then just said, what else is like this? And I had a hard time pointing him towards many things that struck those notes that he loved so much.
Well, I think a lot of the time it's because most people don't want to draw shots like that, but when Mark sent me initially the script for issue 1, the first 5 pages were the whole World War II stuff. And I remember I was in the shower when it sort of occurred to me that morning. I was thinking, let's do it. You see, we've got to storm the beaches, but I don't want to do Private Ryan per se. So let's do it by parachute, which was, and so this mass parachute bomb. And I called Mark and I said, those first 5 pages? He said, yeah. I said, that's the entire first issue, actually. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, I'd kind of explained my thinking in terms of just how to let it breathe and make it, about establishing Steve and his heroism and so on. And Mark went with it. So, he came back with something much closer to what you see in print. Though there was never a script that ever came back quite as Mark wrote it, because he'd write a 22 page script. I'd always turn in anything between 26 and 36 pages of story, and Marvel just let us carry on and do it. I mean, Dan Buckley used to yell a bit sometimes, and then I remember one time he said, this issue is going to be, I said it's going to be 38 pages. Mark had written a 22 page script. And Dan was, okay, what about if we split it into, this is so it became two volumes. This is how it became 2 volumes of 13 issues rather than 12 issues. Because he said, what about the last? He said, what about if you split it up and make it 2 24-page issues, so you get 48 pages instead of 1 38-page issue? So like, that's great. And then it came in as 38 and 42-page issues. So it actually became something like 70 pages of story instead. So it's like, I give up. Just you guys just carry on doing it, and I'll keep out of it.
What I like that was different. Why I say I like it better than the movies, and I like the movies. I'm not dissing the movies. I just, they put an edge on Cap that you didn't see in the movie. Chris Evans is a little softer than our Captain America.
Well, certainly than the Ultimates one. Yeah, the Ultimates one is much more. You see, this hardline kind of 40s guy.
Yes,
very direct, I suppose. And he doesn't have modern sensibilities in quite the same way. Plus,
that is the character though of Cap, and that man out of time essence that you guys I got in a way that I don't know. I haven't seen many other people get with Cap.
I mean, I loved this Chris Evans portrayal in the movies. I think he was perfect for what they were doing. Absolutely perfect.
For that character, yes.
Yeah.
But tell us about another character, though, because this decision was made, and everybody's asking about this in the comments. This decision was made by who and when and why?
Well, Mark again had the initial thought. He was like, and again, this is all based on what was happening in the real world. So you have, Colin Powell is on screens every day talking about, the hunt for bin Laden and all that stuff. And so, the highest and most visually aware military man in America was a black man. This is like 2001. And so, we said that's who Nick Fury would be. So Mark said, this doesn't have to. And Joe Quesada, to be fair, had said, you can do what you like with this stuff. You can kill Steve Rogers. He doesn't have to be Captain America. This is an opportunity to do what works for you guys.
Wow.
So you can do anything you want. And he said that until the book was a huge success. In which case, keep it the way it is. It's fine. Don't do anything.
Don't mess with success, kid.
Yeah, that's right. So Mark was this. Was all for. It's got to be Colin Powell. That's Nick Fury. And that was the moment. That was the genius moment. And I think they recolored something Bendis had written that had been drawn by somebody else. So they'd recolored and shaded or drawn in shadow this character that was originally going to be, clearly George Clooney, to make him look kind of nebulously dark-skinned and in shadow in something. And then Mark did Nick Fury as a black guy in Ultimate X-Men, drawn by Adam Kubert. But I said to Mark, I said, if we're going to carry this stuff on, it's got to be Sam Jackson. I'd seen Shaft, and I just looked at him. I said, that's Nick Fury. That's who you get. That's who you get to play Colin Powell right now. It's not Morgan Freeman. It's him. So I drew a picture of him that way, and everybody's like, can we get away with this? Do you think? And Mark
really an inspired choice, Bryan, because of all the people that complain about gender swaps or race swaps or this and that, I've never heard anyone say anything but like this was the perfect choice.
I suppose because it's become the norm in the last 20 years, and he's been in the movies since the first Iron Man movie, and continues.
And I think it's because he's one of us. He's a comic book guy himself. He's been in other
very much so.
He really actually loves real comic books. So
yeah. And actually, his wife bought several pages for his birthday of those early issues for him, with him on them. So he does own some of the pages.
Okay. So Ultimates didn't just bring us, though. It brought us this conception of Iron Man as well. I think. Not necessarily your particular exact design, although definitely elements of it.
You see, that was never supposed to be more than the first story. That design, that was the equivalent of the clunky armor in the cave. Yeah. And then what happened was Adi Granoff did an even better job of the same principle. My idea with Iron Man, when I was designing him, was that he had to look like he was wearing a body-shaped fighter jet, essentially, not this kind of superhero costume. So
almost Robotech Macross.
Yeah, exactly. It was I'd been thinking about the Japanese stuff as well, but the idea was it was a body-shaped F-14, fighter jet. And Adi did that even better in his Iron Man stuff. And so that's kind of that combination of the two of us is what became the movie Iron Man, I suppose.
Yeah.
And because actually, you see that, don't you? Because the cover for issue 2, which was this of Ultimates, which is the robotic arm stripping the Iron Man armor or putting it on him, became a whole sequence in the movie. Sure. Joss certainly did it in the Avengers movie as well. When he flies onto the top of what became Avengers Tower to talk to Loki, and the armor is stripped off him. It's exactly the cover of Ultimates 2, and Joss said as much. I've known Joss a long time. So he's often saying, "Yeah, we're shooting one of your pages today." So
it was just so much of the characterization, especially probably my favorite underused Avenger, Hank Pym, right? Who is like, I just always viewed him kind of a lot like you guys portrayed him, sort of like dude, I'm smart too. Look at me. I talk to ants. I shrink. I do all this stuff. Like, but people don't respect him as the super genius that he is.
I still think we probably add more to the side of unpleasant in some of that stuff than we needed to.
Yeah.
Um, you know, but maybe
but
it's
that's
because
part
you
of
get
the
so
character too, right? That's part of the original character.
But also, I think, you know, and again, I put this down somewhat to post 9/11 thinking the world was for a bit then quite a nasty place, you know, and a harsh place too. It's certainly what it seemed. And when you're thinking about people that could exist in that world that are ordinary people, you know, comics is always exaggerated to a point. I think we exaggerated the nasty side of ordinary a bit much at times. You know, because there's stuff even I would take further because, you know, like when the Hulk's out, you know, it wasn't in the script that Steve Rogers kicks him when Bruce Banner's unconscious, you know, kicks him unconscious.
Yes.
I put that in, and that's me being nasty, you know, because
right, they would never do that in the movie, and that's why I love this Captain America so much. I don't know, he's just a different kind of person than a modern, like they made the new Cap have such modern sensibilities kind of out of the gate. I love the way you guys played with stuff like when he met Jackson, when he meets Nick Fury the first time, he's like, wait, there were no black guys in World War, you know, serving in that colonel in the army or whatever he was saying. Like, it was really,
well, there weren't, were there?
His frame of mind.
Far from it. I know. Well, you know, there are bits we got right and bits we didn't, I suppose. I mean, it's not a perfect project. Nothing ever is. But, you know, I went back for a reason to look recently at Ultimates. And whilst I can, you know, I can appreciate I've developed more as an artist, I think I've got a better idea about how to draw than I had then. I think my artwork is more fluid. I think between the end of The Authority and the end of Ultimates, I think my art started stiffening up a lot, getting more deliberate and more, I think, as a result, certainly post Ultimates, quite stiff and quite ugly. And I don't think that started changing again until probably about Hawkman. And again, once I started working much faster, I think my work has now regained a certain kind of immediacy and fluidity it hadn't had since these early Ultimates issues. But one thing
I read every issue of Hawkman and Batman's Great, but I don't have them here. I want to talk to you. I want to keep talking just about whatever you want, like Hawkman. We'll get you out of here pretty soon, but
well, you can always do this as like you can always do a two-parter, and we can do the old stuff, and we always come back and do Hawkman and Batman's Grave and beyond. You know.
Oh man, will you commit to that right here on live?
Sure,
YouTube?
Yeah, because you know it's already getting on, and you know kids are going to bed, and the dogs are going to need to go out for a poo. So
I agree. It's been over an hour, and we're barely cracking Ultimates 1. So I'm not going to go through all of this today. But let's make this a stopping point here. We can talk about Ultimates, and then I want to get a couple questions, and we'll get you out of here. But if you are willing to come back, I'd love.
Sure.
I really do. I can't get you out of here though without asking you a little bit about Hawkman, because we had Robert Venditti in here. He's awesome. When Hawkman came out, I go, Hawkman, Bryan Hitch. I told the guy at the comic book store, I go, order more of this comic, but don't be surprised if you wait a while between issues, okay? Because you got to wait for quality.
Yeah.
But, dude, you surprised the heck out of me. And you had a reputation for lateness. You've talked about it. A lot of it was because of circumstances outside of your control. But I've noticed, reading your Twitter and other things, you seem to have had a change in mind about work ethic and what it means to deliver comics. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well,
that was important to me. That's the biggest thing I wanted to talk to you about. I mean, you picked up a brush in recent years and started inking your own work.
Well, I've been inking my own work on and off forever, you know, right since the beginning. I've always liked the inking part of it. And Paul Neri taught me a lot too. And Paul was very much a pen inker. So that leads to a certain kind of approach. But I never really started inking with a brush until well past Ultimates.
Yes.
And it took me years to get the hang of it, but it did change the way I thought about my own work. But if you're talking about what led, I mean, up until Hawkman, Authority was the only time I'd done any 12 issues on time, you know, at all, with any sort of sustained kind of momentum. And the thing was, I approached Hawkman with the same idea that I approached The Authority, was that no matter what, this book is coming out on time. no matter what. And it just became about doing the pages, and that actually liberated me enormously from any expectations I put on myself. I just thought, trust yourself. You've spent a long time learning. Just do it. If there were compromises that went beyond what I was comfortable, but again, nobody seemed bothered about it. There was one page, I'm not going to name the page because people go looking for it, but there was one page where it was the last page of an issue that I drew, and it was the end of a sequence, and I had to go on holiday for 2 weeks the very following morning, and I literally ran out of time by a couple of hours to drawing the backgrounds on it. And Andrew said he would do them. That's fine, because Andrew's a terrific artist in his own right anyway. So you said, look, don't worry, I'll do it. You go on holiday, relax for 2 weeks. So, at the end of that 2 week holiday, I was still on holiday, and the coloring was coming in for me to approve and look at. And I got to that page again, and not only had Andrew not inked it, but whoever had inked it hadn't inked the backgrounds either, because there weren't any. There were just little marks where backgrounds should be possibly indicated, and they just inked those marks. And I was just horrified. It's like, but look at all the other pages; they're so detailed, and all the backgrounds are there. It's just
so much.
And this page is sitting there. Not only does this not look right, one of those characters didn't even look like I drew him. I was like, this is horrific. People are going to want me off the book by tomorrow. Not only did people not notice that page was not only not finished by me, but not finished even by the inker. It was Robert's favorite page of the issue, and he bought the original artwork.
That's hilarious.
So, my worst page of my entire run on Hawkman was one that Robert bought as his favorite of the issue. So there was a lot of things going on there, and there's a lot to talk about in why you suddenly kind of get your shit together. Everything from mental health to process and an understanding of what you're capable of and your belief in yourself, rather than your lack of belief, and that whole imposter syndrome where you think you're not capable and you're not good enough, and why can't I be like all those guys I admire, and those other guys are working in comics now, and and in the end I reached a fairly decent equilibrium, and my determination was that no matter what it looked like, Hawkman would come out on time. And we started drawing that book on day one without a single day of lead time. Starting drawing issue 1, the book was due at the printers 4 weeks later, fully inked and coloured and lettered. And yet,
that's funny, because I assumed you had 6 months in the can or something.
Nope,
if they would insist you did, that's what I
had 3 plots on my desk from Robert, but by the time DC had got my contract sorted out, there was delays. Don't ask me what they were, but there was delays. By the time there was an agreement in place, even just about the rates, I actually didn't get my contract paperwork from DC until I was on about issue 8. But we had an agreement in place in principle. So, but by the time that was sorted out, there was no lead time, not a single day of it. So I just thought, what, I've got 2 choices: I either do it or I don't do it. And I will be a little honest here. I thought, I am not going to make a splash of Hawkman the way I made on the Ultimates 20 years or 18 years ago.
Right.
It's just not going to happen. It's not a Batman book. It's not going to reinvent the wheel. So I can't just try and wow the world with one single brilliantly drawn issue. So what can I do on Hawkman? I thought, well, what I can do is I can tell the story. I'll just do it well, and I'll be there every month, and we'll build something. That was my thinking.
I'm going to say it was a joy and a pleasure to go 12 months in a row and have a great comic in the box. It was
what I wanted. That was what I wanted you to think. That was exactly my goal with that book. That in a nutshell was my ambition for the project.
Nailed it, Bryan. You nailed it. And then it was my favorite comic of that year as far as mainstream superhero stuff coming out. Like Head and Shoulders was one of the only books I read. And then Batman's Grave. When I heard about Batman's Grave, I was just over the moon. Warren Ellis writing Batman alone would have had me in that. And then they say Bryan Hitch, and then they say the inker, whose name I'm spacing on, but it's
Kevin Nolan. It was supposed to be, yeah.
Kevin Nolan on the first issue too. And then it was amazing.
Well, the thing is, what's interesting about that, if you want the real timeline, is what happened was that Batman's Grave came first before Hawkman. And I penciled the first issue before Hawkman was even a consideration. So, but what happened was Warren got really busy on some TV and some film stuff, and he said, "Look, I actually just don't know when I can get to the second issue." So Dan said, "Look, we've got this Hawkman thing. Can you draw the first 4 issues of it?" So I said, "Yeah, okay." And then I actually managed to get 12 issues done before issue 2 of Batman's Grave was ready. So it was actually literally because Batman's Grave was late. Late because Warren was so busy that I actually ended up doing Hawkman. So Hawkman was essentially a long-term fill-in issue, if you like.
I bought a page with Alfred on it from you because your Alfred was so great, and the scenes of Batman and Alfred in this book are some of the best that I've ever read. Like,
my favorite scene in the entire book is Alfred. It's when Alfred shoots the guy with the multiple gunshots.
Perfect. And his reaction to Batman being concerned about using a gun.
Yes, perfect.
Perfect.
Well, you see, that's why you do this stuff, is because you get a scene like that that's just beautifully written and judged, and you think, all I actually have to do here is just tell the story, just do the pictures, because the work's been done. Sometimes you have to do the lifting, sometimes the writer's done the lifting, but
you know what? I'm on. This is that issue. This is that issue.
Yeah, that is the one. Yeah, that was my favorite.
I don't want to. I should buy this page. Have you sold this page yet?
I don't know. I can have a look in a minute.
Because I bought a page.
That shot, I was pleased with, because again, that's the left to right movement again.
Yes.
Because you want him running at Alfred, but you had his movement retarded, and so that's how left to right movement works in storytelling. Just since I want to bang on about that point again.
Alfred's face and his reaction, and just what we know about Alfred, his military background, it's just so perfect.
I like with Alfred, there's completely emotionless when he's doing it. There's no expression, no emotion. It's just a job. He's doing it.
It's moments like this that really made me think Alfred was probably abused Bruce Wayne to the point that he became Batman. Like psychologically abused him.
I don't know. I think it might have inspired him.
Yeah, that's what I mean. But like, he was egging him along or something. You don't just become Batman. You don't just, your parents die and then you get given to the butler and then you grow up to be this thing.
No, I think Alfred's whispered in his ear about getting vengeance and bringing people to justice and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure.
No doubt.
I think Bruce's sense of justice comes from Alfred, not from his parents.
I think you're right. He is his parent, right? Alfred is Bruce's father. There's no doubt.
Definitely,
Brian. I can't keep you here much longer. I want to bring in some questions from the other people because you said you'll come back.
Let's do some quick questions. Yeah, we'll do.
Let's pick it up
from Ultimates next time.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Any questions out there? I'm going to just go through some of the comments that are out there already. We had our buddy Dan Fraga. He's a comics pro. Fraga says hi. Linkovich says, "Hey, great story, man." So many people just in here just to talk about how awesome your stuff is, how legendary you are. I really think. Well, Brian, what do you think, man? Do you think you get the credit you deserve out there? I feel like, why can't Bryan Hitch walk into DC or Marvel and tell them whatever comic I want to work on, and they just say yes?
Well, to be honest, I kind of do. I'm very lucky like that. I mean, Marvel offered me some pretty cool stuff I just couldn't turn down. CB and I go way back, because CB was one of the assistant editors on the Ultimates way back when. So he's been trying to get me to come back in since he got in editor-in-chief, and we've been waiting until contracts ended. But he offered a couple of projects I couldn't really say no to, and I wish I could tell you what they were. One was because I just would never have occurred to me to do it, and I liked that idea, that it was something I would never have thought of doing myself. And you think, well, what can I bring to that? And actually, it's been really cool. The writers are great. The project's really good fun. And then what comes next is just, I think it's gonna it's going to kind of melt some elements of the internet.
Can you give us a scoop? What can you give us a hint?
I cannot even hint at what that project is. You know, and I'm well into an issue into a black label project for DC, which Kevin's going to be inking again.
Whoa!
And Mark Waid is writing, and it's just great. It's just been really good fun to work on. So you know,
are you drawing on those funny sized pages for the black label?
Yeah, I'm drawing larger in general at the moment, actually, because I was doing because it's the same format as Miller and Johnny's Superman Year One. So it's that same large format. So, you know, the pages are slightly different. The paper I'm working on is bigger anyway, but the pages are flatter and wider.
Yes.
So by the time you've scaled up a little bit from print, you're left with something that's about 10% bigger than in area than the pages you normally work on. And I've got quite used to that kind of 10% bigger. Actually, that goes back a long time though, because before the modern comics all became bleed comics originally were just were done on a sheet of artboard. 11 by 17 was just what we now call the live art area, which is smaller than that. And the first bleed comics, they made bigger paper, so you'd have the 11 by 17 was the live art, and then they put the additional bleed area around it, so the paper was much bigger. Sure. And then they gradually shrunk the bleed paper to be 11 by 17. So the live art area I've often found to be just a little too small for me because I started on bigger sizes. You know, so I'm much more comfortable.
So you like the change of, you don't mind the slight change in dimensionality of the page or anything like that?
No, it led to some interesting realizations going. I thought because it's wider, when you do wide panels, they're wider than you're normally comfortable with a wide screen. It's like CinemaScope rather than widescreen, you know?
Yeah.
So it took a little bit of getting used to in how you approach the visuals. Not that I think anybody will notice, but it was interesting to me that it lends itself to a particular type of storytelling that maybe you know, I should have thought ahead of in advance about. But I wanted to tell it, you know, again with no panel borders. I wanted very much with everything contained with panel borders and a certain kind of rhythm.
And then a double page spread is like IMAX.
Yeah, so it's really wide. Yeah, you've got a few of those, and so we keep them for when they matter. You know, and Mark's been really great with it. You know, he's written, although he's writing, it's almost full script. There's dialogue, but sometimes he just writes these pages. This happens, you know, and so he's left me comfortably wide open to kind of just take what he's written and try and tell it the best way I can than his re-dialoguing. So it's a really comfortable way of working for me because it's specific but wide open to rethinking, you know, in terms of my storytelling rather than it being Mark's visual storytelling.
You said this is Mark Millar. You guys are working on the Black Label book? No,
it's Mark Waid.
On the Black Label. Excellent, great. Okay, fantastic. A friend of the show. He's been on this show before too. Fantastic.
Yeah, Mark and I worked together years ago, and our Justice League run unfortunately wasn't what it should have been for various reasons. I could get into. Spent a whole show talking about that one. But you know, we've remained, you know, in contact. We've always wanted to work together on something, but we had a very specific idea on what something had to be. Unfortunately, DC let us do it. So
I have a guess. I don't even want to spoil
it. Don't even say the word.
I know what it is. I know what it is. It's guessable. So you can guess it out there, people. Okay. So Bryan, I've kept you here for so long. I want you, and you're talking about coming back. I'm not going to pin you down on a time, but hopefully
we'll figure it out. We'll do it soon.
Yeah, maybe the next month or couple months or something like that.
Yeah,
maybe.
definitely.
Yeah. Awesome. And maybe I can talk to Mark Waid, and when you guys are ready to promote that book, maybe you come in and talk about that book, maybe?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we'll see when they're going. It's not coming out till next year because Kevin can't start inking it if he's still able to do so until the second half of the year. So
I can't wait.
But I'm so looking. I've drawn that with him in mind. I know what he'll do with it, and I'm just really pleased because it's such a. I love Kevin. His work is just wonderful. I mean, he's always been really kind about, you know, working with me. Like you said, you know, he described working with me as the most fun he's ever had tracing pencil lines, and I think he was doing himself a disservice because when he did ink the Batman stuff, he definitely brought something else to the page.
Dude, they look great. Your pages that you ink look great, but there's a tiny difference. I almost didn't catch it at first when the switch happened. After, but it's tough, dude. It's tough to follow an inking act like a Kevin Nolan, right?
Well, unfortunately, I also didn't have the kind of time. I mean, Kevin would have, even if he was doing a monthly, he'd have 4 weeks to ink an issue, and I had a week and a half, every issue to ink it. So,
Have you worked with Nick Gray before from DC?
No,
Inker Gray?
No, I haven't.
He did a lot of work with J.H. Williams. He inked a lot of Promethea, and he's a good friend. He's a good friend of mine, and he's a great guy and a great inker. And just if you got a way to find some work for Mick Gray, please do. Get that guy more work. He deserves it. He's awesome. Bryan, I want to thank you for taking the time to come in, answer questions. I thank you for agreeing to come back, man. This is difficult for me to schedule, and you put up with a lot of hassle from me and a lot of neediness from me to get you.
So needy. God, you are needy, man. But yeah, no, it's fine. Hey, look, I can pour a glass of wine and shoot the breeze. It's fine.
Cool. Okay, thanks. Well, then we're definitely going to do it again. Thank you again. I got to do my outro. I realize you probably got to go. So I'll see you soon.
I'll wait and say goodbye when you're done.
Oh, please do. Thanks. I'll make it quick. I promise. Okay. Oops. Guys, thank you for sticking around. That was great. That was an hour and 21 minutes that went by like nothing. Wait a minute. Where do we go from here?
My spider senses are starting to tingle.
Okay. Oh, so, okay, folks. Sorry, I got to get my mic working. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for watching this thing. Thank you for sticking around for the whole thing. A lot of people stuck around and watched. A lot of people commented. This is great. A lot for this stream anyway. So thank you for watching. Come back next week and talk to my man, Mark Evanier. Pretty sure that's how I'm pronouncing it correctly. Where's that thumbnail? Mark Evanier. It's going to be awesome. We'll talk to him about, oh gosh, so many things and so many people that he's worked with, including Sergio Aragonés and Stan Sakai and the rest of the GRU crew. We'll talk to him. You stick around. We're going to play the closing credits right now. And as usual, there's a very short comic book cameo at the end of the credits, just like any good comic book movie, of course. Thanks for watching. Come back next time, whenever that is, and we will see you then next time.